Hello and welcome to Experts Talk Jihad. I'm Adriana and I'm hosting today's event. Today we're discussing the role and meaning of jihad in a polarized world. We're very fortunate to have Chris, who's also on the screen, and Mohammed, who's participating with Chris from behind the screen. Chris and Mohammed have studied jihadi ideologies and follow the Islamic State in particular. Before we get started, I want to remind you that you can join the discussion on social media using the hashtag #TalkJihad, or to participate in the discussion by commenting on Google+. Chris and Mohammed will answer questions from the Talk Jihad community near the end of the event. Chris and Mohammed, thank you for being here. As you know, a lot of people are very interested in this discussion, and these questions about jihad have very real impacts on people's lives. To begin, I'd like to begin by asking each of you to introduce yourselves and describe why you think it's important and relevant to talk about jihad. So we'll start with Mohammed.
Yes, Mohammed Ubaidi. I think this topic is very important because jihadism has been one of the one of the tools used by terrorists, and in order to understand our enemies, we need to understand that war, its roots and the history, and how do they use it to justify their deeds.
Yes, so thank you, Mohammed, and thanks for having us today. Look, the term jihad is extremely controversial, and to be honest, it's being held captive and being used by folks with a distorted view. And we think it's important today to talk about this and have a dialogue. And so it's great having folks like Muhammad who are truly experts on this, and we look forward to the dialogue today.
Thank you. I'll start with questions. For either of you, can you describe the current global climate as it relates to terrorism and the divide between Islamic culture and Western countries?
So I'll start, and then Muhammad can fill in some of the gaps. Now, when it comes to look, the threat posed by terrorism and the threat posed by folks that are so-called jihadists, it's one of the most pressing national security issues that we have, not only within the United States, but also with the troubled areas of the Middle East and North Africa. And so what I think is important is to have this dialogue to better understand what it means to be, what jihad means to the faith of Islam, and what it means in a Western context. And so part of this is because one of the reasons why we're doing this is because we feel as though there are folks that are living in the United States and the West that want to learn more about the faith of Islam, want to learn more about what jihad means within the faith, and how it relates to organizations that, again, are utilizing jihad in the violent context to further their ideology. Muhammad says I couldn't say it better than that.
So with that fear that people have, how prevalent is radical extremism really in this climate, and how does that occur? How does it come about?
So let me take a crack at this, and then Muhammad can kind of fill in some of the gaps. Look, when it comes to extremism, there are several theoretical models out there that describe what's happening. And so part of that is people get or develop grievances. Those grievances could result from lack of economic opportunities. Those could be political grievances. Those could be a number of different grievances. And so once they have that grievance, they try to explain those grievances, and it opens up what we call an ideological void. And so what is filling the ideological void in many extremists? Some of this is the jihadi ideology, which they latch on to, that both explains those grievances, explains the best way to deal with them, and explains how to solve those grievances, or how to act in order to stop those. And so what we're hoping by webinars like this, and with our campaign, Let's Talk Jihad, that we are able to open up this dialogue and for instead of organizations like the Islamic State to fill that ideological void with information, we're hoping to provide alternatives to that narrative in order to let folks know that look, there are nonviolent means by which you can address some of these grievances.
Just want to add one quick point here that people or Muslims in the Middle East or in Muslim Islamic countries are the most people affected by jihadism and these jihadist groups in general, whether it's the Islamic State or any other groups that use jihad to justify their work, and they definitely opposed to this movement. Most of them, the mass majority of them, for a very, very simple reason. The message of jihadis or jihadism is about death. It's about using this life only to get killed for the cause. And this is basically and simply against the human nature. This is why, regardless of any other possible reasons, this is why I think jihadism or jihad is born as a minority, very, very small minority thought or ideology, and it's gonna stay like this, and hopefully it's gonna die like this.
You started to touch on this a little bit, but other than extremists using jihad in a violent context, are there positive examples of jihad?
So there in Quran, let's explain the word jihad and how it's used. First of all, the root of the word jihad is juhud or jihad, which is the effort or to strive or to carry on effort to achieve something, regardless of what is that thing. In Quran, the root of the word and its derivative has been used 39 times. Most of these times, it's been used to promote or to spread the religion of God and against the infidels or the unbelievers. Whether if it's so, this is the goal. The means to carry out this jihad is three ways. It was mentioned as it could use by the tongue, which means by the argument, the discussion, which is mostly depending on Islamic Quranic verses or Hadith verses. By the good deeds is when you do good deeds and try to explain your religion in a good way. This way you're defending your religion, you're defending against the infidels, and this is based on Quran, or by weapon. So this is the three ways to use jihad to defend Islam against the infidels. But also there is another way that jihad is used in Quran, which is jihad against the devil, or jihad against the incel, the grievance of a human nature. And this is the way that Muslim scholars all around the world try to explain that this is how jihad should be. It's jihad against the bad deeds, and try to have this as part of your daily routine exercise. And it doesn't have to be the jihad of weapon. It doesn't have to be the jihad that everybody's been talking about around. So, for instance, when I go to my work, I carry out jihad, and it's a jihad of going through a traffic jam, and it's a jihad of being with a boss who you don't like, or in your life, in your daily life, your wife. So jihad is basically should be everywhere and in all aspects of life.
So can I ask Muhammad a follow-on question on that? So given that there are these different interpretations of jihad, and I think I know the answer to this, why do you think that the violent version is the most popular one, arguably, at this point?
So jihadis, in order to justify whatever they're doing and in order to get the support of Muslims, they have to use religion strongly, and they have to use and the only way to use religion in a credible way is to use Quranic verses, and they are masters of using this to support their argument. And it started the idea of jihad, the modern. Let's go back a little bit in history and let's see how it was used. Jihad, the beginning of Islam. In most of the cases, it was the jihad of defense. It was as a reaction for something, for oppression, for something bad happened to Muslims. It started with the Prophet Muhammad when he was oppressed by Quraysh tribe. So he was forced with his people to leave Mecca towards Medina. Then even when they left, when they migrated, they were still, their families, their properties were burned in Mecca. So the first verse of jihad, or it was, jihad wasn't particularly mentioned, it was qital or qatil or fight. Fight those who oppress you. So that was the first occasion in which jihad was committed in Islam, was as a self-defense mechanism. And it continues like this until just a few years before the death of Prophet Muhammad, and forward, the period that comes forward with the four caliphs. Then fast forward when Baghdad fall on the Mongolians on the 13th century, we started to see a rise of jihad again. And again, it was as a self-defense mechanism, and by a person who called Ibn Taymiyyah, or Sheikh of Islam, Sheikh of Islam. And he started to use this widely to remind Muslims that jihad is the only way to get their pride back. Jihad is the only way to defend themselves against the invader, who was the Mongolians at that time. And again, fasting forward, it happened again many times, but I'm just counting the most significant times in the history. In the previous Soviet invasion to Afghanistan back in the 70s and 80s, again, there was a guy by the name Abdullah Azzam, a Palestinian scholar, who called Muslims to rise again, because this is the only way to, you know.
And was this more offensive jihad?
This is all in the defensive jihad.
Defensive, okay.
This is all in the offensive jihad was only used before the death of Prophet Muhammad and after his death during the caliphs, the four caliphs. That was the offensive jihad, where you go and separate Islam with the use of force. So they started first by the use of peaceful means. If it didn't work, then the use of force. So back to your question on why it's important, why it's getting attention of Muslims right now. Again, based on all these historical facts, it's because historically this is the ways that used by scholars to justify or to say that this is the only way for Islam to come back and hit back and defend itself.
Thank you, Mohammed, for that history. Chris had to leave us for a moment. Mohammed is still here, again, behind the camera, so we'll keep going with our questions. How does jihad play a role in the goals and actions of the organization ISIS? Sure. He's asked me to repeat the question. What role does jihad play for ISIS? How does it help further their goals?
It's a very, very important question, and it's their main way of. So again, they say that jihad has been for a long time is the forgotten duty. They say that there are 4 pillars that all Muslims know: praying, fasting, Hajj, pilgrimage to Mecca, and Zakah, which is charity. And there is a forgotten one that all Muslims try to avoid, which is jihad. And the only way to bring back the pride of the Ummah is by carrying out jihad. However, they don't only use jihad to separate themselves or to advocate for themselves. On the territories under their control, they show that they're good in governing as well, which is something new on the jihadi movement or jihadi groups. For instance, Al-Qaeda didn't or hasn't claimed to govern regions. All what they do is jihad, carry out jihad to help Muslims do that themselves. Whereas the Islamic State said that we are a state now, or moreover, we are a caliphate now. So We are carrying out jihad in the front lines, also on the territories under our control. We are governing, and we are governing based on Sharia. This is why we're carrying out jihad, is to govern Muslims based on Sharia, not based on democracy, not based on constitutions, because they're all man-made laws, and we only rule based on God's laws.
Some people say and discuss the idea that the Islamic State wants the United States to go to war with them. What do you think ISIS wants the United States and other Western countries to do, and why? How are Western countries supposed to relate to Sharia law and jihad?
It's interesting you ask this question, because everybody thinks that the Islamic State really wants the United States, the West, to go and fight there, and they're trying to pull out there. But I think the reasonable thinking would say that this is a suicide. And to be honest with you, I think personally that this is not what they really want, but this is what they use in their propaganda, because they realize that none of the Western states will do that, will go and put boots on the ground right now. And by that, they're saying, see, we're telling you, they're coward. They're not coming fight us on the ground. They're only bombing us from the sky. They're killing us randomly, killing Muslims, because it's war against Islam. It's not war against us or terrorism, as they're claiming. And by that, they're not only showing themselves as credible, but they're also getting the attention of other Muslims around the world to help their recruitment. What they really want is what that they personally said in the recent issue of Dabaq, the 12th issue of Dabaq, and it was a piece written by the journalist John Campy, who's been captured by them for years now. And in his article, very shortly, I'll describe very shortly the idea of the article, is that saying the West has no choice but to offer a truce to the Islamic State. They won't be able to defeat it from air. They won't put boots on the ground. They don't have the will to do that, and therefore the only way to win this war is by offering truce, to accepting the Islamic State as a real state, and then to offer truce to the Islamic State. This is the Islamic State indirectly saying that we will accept truce right now from the West. That's what they want. That's what they really want from the West.
Okay. So would you say that people you see radicalizing online are carrying out the wishes of the Islamic State? How does that play into what's going on?
With regards to people radicalized online, it's a very tough question. I wish that we have the answer for it. But they use a very, very attractive. So their media, they're very successful, unfortunately, in their media campaign. First of all, this is an organization that has been there for 12 years now, and they're a very adaptive organization. And in one of the documents released by them themselves, they realize how important the media is, and they point to mistakes that they personally done and how it should be avoided, and what's the best way to avoid it. And one of these mistakes is the use of the media. So currently they're using the media the best way they think it is, and I think it's very effective. They're addressing audiences from different Muslims and from different nations in their own language. So they're using a French Muslim to address a French Muslim who is part of the Islamic State to address Muslims of France. And they're using Indonesian Muslims who are part of the Islamic State to address Muslims in Indonesia. Each one, they know not just the language, they know what's the culture, what's the understanding of the youth of that country. And they say, hey, what are you waiting for? You're living in the land of unbelief. You've been governed by man-made laws, which are not necessarily compatible with what the Islamic State law, the Sharia, says. We're here, on the other hand, doing exactly what Allah orders us to do. What are you waiting for? You want to come to join us? Come join us. You don't want to fight? You don't have to fight. If you're a teacher, you can come to the Islamic State and we can give you a teaching position in one of our schools. If you're a doctor, you can come to one of our hospitals and practice your profession. If you don't want to do anything, we'll give you an apartment, we'll give you a salary, and we just want you to come here. And we're doing this not for our sake, it's for your sake. This is the message they use. Hey, you're not married, you can have women here. You can marry 1, 2, 3, 4 women, and this is based on Sharia. This is not something that we enforce. So it's a very appealing message. It's very and again, the grievances that Chris mentioned previously, all these things that are in the Islamic societies, the apostate governors that are corrupted, and they are sucking the wealth of the Muslims and giving nothing to them and oppressing them. All these things they manipulate and they use in a smart way to attract more Muslims for their cause.
So part of the title of this webinar is addressing this issue in a polarized world, and considering some current negative Western sentiment toward the Muslim population, what might be the best way, this is two-pronged, Muslims can effectively communicate the true meaning of Islam to the American and Western people, and how can Westerners educate themselves and other non-Muslims to better understand the culture?
I think Muslims are already trying to do that. I heard a couple of weeks ago that there was a Muslim imam in DC area who started peaceful demonstrations against IS actions and against all violence, saying that Islam is the religion of peacefulness, Islam, and trying to convey the message. There's 1.6 billion, over 1.6 billion Muslims around the world, and those people are only a fraction of real Muslims. They were held in conferences, but again, the problem is there's a one noisy person, and you put him in the middle of 1,000 other people. The people from my side will only hear the one noisy person, which is the Islamic State in this case. So it's a tough battle, and unfortunately, we're living it.
Yeah, I've heard stories like that as well. In Paris, after the shootings, a Muslim man wore a blindfold and had the sign that said, "Do you trust me?" and hugged people that were mourning. Some really special things going on. So I'm going to take a moment to go over to social media and pull up some questions from the community. So we have. Okay, here's one. They asked, how can we decrease xenophobia? How should we integrate the recent and future influx of Syrian refugees into Western countries?
Yeah, that's another problem here. That's a very, very good question. This has also been used by Islamic State media widely. That Western countries are not accepting Syrian refugees. This is their truth. Why you leaving the land of Islam? Come back to us. I think it's a problem on many levels. I personally think that we should find a way to accept those refugees. It's very shameful what's happening. We definitely need to figure out. I mean, regardless of the Syrian, there are also any other stories that are not seeing the light. Like, for instance, there's 8,000 Iraqi refugees now in the camps of Sulaymaniyah. They are basically residents of Salahuddin province, which is north of Baghdad, and they're refugees in tents in Sulaymaniyah. Right now, it's snowing in Sulaymaniyah, and they are suffering a lot from this crisis. They can't go back to their homes. They can't leave Iraq. There are a lot of displacements inside Iraq and Syria. There are a lot of people get killed every day. And believe it or not, people who are getting killed by Assad forces and Assad jet fighters are 9 times more than people who get killed by ISIS in Iraq, in Syria. We definitely need to figure out a way. I'm not in a position to say what is the way, but we need to figure out a way to accept all this.
Sure. Another question, a little bit related to our previous. What do you see for the future of Islamic culture?
Well, it's the culture itself is staying as long as humanity is staying, just like Christianity or Buddhism or Judaism. It's the religion itself is just a religion, just like any other religions. There is a lot of most of it. It's teach people how to interact with each other in a harmony way. It didn't survive all these years, 1400 years, because of killing or because of carrying out jihad in a negative way. It definitely survived because of the guidance to Muslims how to be part of the entire society or entire world in a nice way. So it's the people, unfortunately, the minority of minorities and minority again of the people who are misusing this religion. But the religion itself, the culture of the religion itself is going to survive, I'm sure of that, and it's going to, and I think that Muslims are the only people who will defeat this disease, if you will.
Okay, absolutely, that's interesting to hear. Do you have any final thoughts on this topic before we conclude?
No, I'm happy to take any more questions.
Well, I do want to conclude at about a half an hour by saying thank you, Mohammed and Mr. Chris, for your participation in today's event. If you've been watching, we hope you enjoyed this discussion, and please continue to post your questions and personal responses to questions that were answered today and your thoughts about this discussion. Thank you for watching.